What's going on, sports fan? It's K-Stu the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports. We're talking about Auburn football and the rest of the SEC. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang. It's the off season, baby, but we are not taking the off season off. War damn Eagle. Now, here's the situation, guys. I was looking over some stuff, and LSU has not finalized the contract for Ed Orgeron, and they shouldn't. Because if they go based off of the emotions of last season, they're going to really Gus Malzahn this contract. And they're going to wind up being stuck with a crazy buyout with somebody who could potentially fold. I have nothing against Ed Orgeron. What they did last season was incredible because I expected LSU to be not necessarily terrible, but I did not expect them to make the kind of noise that they made in the SEC last year. There's some similarities between how Auburn jumped the gun in extending Gus Malzahn's contract and what LSU hopefully is not going to do with Ed Orgeron. Number one, Auburn did the unlikely. They won against, Alabama and Georgia in somewhat consecutive weeks. Both teams were number one at the time, and Auburn was kind of surging. They had the disappointing loss, ironically, to LSU earlier that year, and Gus Malzahn got in a position to win those two games and then put himself in a possibility or opportunity to be the first two-loss team to make it to the college football playoff, okay? That didn't work out. Kerryon Johnson gets injured in the Alabama game. He's limping around against Georgia. Jarrett Stidham does his turnover thing. And next thing you know, Auburn loses in the SEC championship and faces UCF and probably takes one of the most embarrassing losses on the big stage in Auburn history, as UCF was able to keep their national title, rant and rave going. Matter of fact, even going so far as to say that they were the self-proclaimed national champions. If UCF would have played Alabama, Alabama would have beat them from Florida all the way to Hawaii. Would have mopped the floor with them. I'm telling you. Now, fast forward. LSU comes into this season. Not necessarily low expectations, but nobody really expected them to do what they did. At the time, it seems that the shellacking that they gave Miami was huge. Yes, it did turn out to be huge. Miami did finish the season 7-6 with anemic offense. They just couldn't get it back going. Great win for LSU. Then, ironically, they come to Auburn, and Auburn was pretty much beating them all over the field until the middle of the third quarter, where Auburn started to kind of fall apart, and LSU wins that game by a field goal as the time expired. Auburn had no chance to get the football back and try for a miraculous comeback. Probably the most impressive win, in my opinion, of that whole year was Georgia takes the trip down to Death Valley for the first time in a very long time, and LSU absolutely demolishes Georgia 36-16, putting Georgia in a very compromised position to where they must win the SEC championship in order to vie for a college football playoff. Georgia actually went toe-to-toe to Alabama, only to call probably one of the worst plays prior to Bama's fake punt. Georgia calls one of the worst plays, a fake field goal, a fake punt, or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was, but it was the worst play call in history. And Alabama goes on to utilize Jalen Hurts, of all people, off the bench to double reverse what happened last year when Tua Tagovailoa came off the bench and did the same thing. So let's go back to Ed Orgeron, though. I just don't want LSU to get themselves in a position where it's a lot of emotional decisions that are made in college football. Everybody's big on Ed Orgeron because he went 10-3, but you got to really dissect that thing. All right, so you go to Auburn and you beat them 22-21. I think at the time Auburn was kind of, okay at the time. They were still kind of riding off that Washington win. I will go out on a limb and say, if Auburn would have beat LSU, their season would, from a psychological standpoint, would have been a lot different. Auburn let LSU hang around. They made some catastrophic mistakes. Okay, we we get it. You get an okay win on the road, but that thing could have went either way. Kind of similar to some of the wins that Auburn had that same year that Gus Malzahn got that ridiculous 7-year, $49 million contract. LSU also surrendered the loss to Texas A&M. That was a huge loss for Texas for LSU. And I'm not saying, now here's the thing, I'm not saying that Ed Orgeron shouldn't get a contract extension. I'm not saying that. But what LSU as an institution needs to do is to protect themselves from a ridiculous buyout from a coach who probably cannot sustain, who potentially cannot sustain, what he did this year. And he also lost some games he shouldn't have lost. So what I'm looking at, okay, if you're going to extend the contract, who's really checking for Ed Orgeron anyway? Where is he going to go? Who really wants Ed Orgeron? Not saying that he's a bad coach, but he's not necessarily a hot commodity. Extend the guy's contract for 2 years, see what he does, and then go from there. But don't Gus Malzahn this thing. Where you give a guy 7 years off of 2 games? That is absolutely ridiculous. I will never, as much of an Auburn fan as I am, and I actually halfway like Gus, I don't dislike Gus Malzahn. I think based on his body of work prior to, I think he's doing a phenomenal job as a coach. Dude was a high school coach for the vast majority of his career, and he's competitive somewhat against Nick Saban. So we can't take that away from Gus Malzahn. But 7 years, $49 million, and then a $32 million buyout, I just don't think that's a good economic move for the institution. Now, do they have the money to pay the buyout? Yeah, I think so. Hell yeah, they got the money to buy it out. However, it's just a bad business decision. So I hope LSU doesn't fall for the smoke and mirrors of Ed Orgeron having a great season and then he turns around next year and disappoints you, baby, because the SEC West is getting tough. Texas A&M is not playing with y'all. They're having a very, very good year recruiting. Auburn is having a very, very good year. Could sneak, if they could pull some of these recruits that haven't signed on the dotted line yet, Auburn could ease into the top 10 recruiting-wise. And you know what Alabama is doing. You know what Mississippi professed to be doing. People say, all right, Mississippi State's going to be a top 10 team. I will believe it when I see it, because Mississippi State will always be Mississippi State. Ole Miss will always be Ole Miss. But that's a whole nother video. Once again, it's K-Stu to go for Vernon Speaks Sports. LSU. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan, but I hate bad business decisions. I think if you jump the gun too hard, you're gonna be regretting it, and you're gonna be crying next year when Ed Orgeron goes 8-5, and then you just signed a 6-year, $72 million contract off of a 10-3 record. That doesn't make any business sense. Once again, it's K-Stu the GOAT for Vernon Speaks Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football, but I love the SEC. It just means more. You all take it easy. Like, comment, and subscribe, and pray for your boy Kelly Bryant. Take it easy.